Why did Naomi want Orpah and Ruth to remain in Moab? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Ruth on Walking Through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Ruth 1, verses 6 to 14. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Ruth chapter 1, verse 6. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Ruth chapter 1, beginning at verse 6. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. Therefore she went out from the place where she was, and her two daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, Go return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, Surely we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight, and should also bear sons, would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. In the beginning of our study of the book of Ruth, we find that Ruth is not a Hebrew, she is a Moabite. The reason she came in contact with the Hebrews, and hence has a book named after her in the Old Testament, is because Elimelech uprooted his family from Bethlehem in Judah during a famine and moved to Moab. While there, Elimelech's sons, Mahlon and Chilion, married Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. Over the 10-year period that Elimelech's family lived in Moab, all three men of the family died. And what's worse, there were no heirs left behind. 3 widows and no heirs. In that day and age, having no heirs was a recipe for poverty, because inheritance was usually determined by heirs, and mothers were taken care of by their sons. These were tough times for these women indeed. And yet for Naomi it seemed much worse for her at that time than for Orpah and Ruth. Why? Because as we find out, Naomi is an elderly woman and past the time of childbearing. Now this doesn't mean that she's 70 or 80, but she could easily be 45 to 50. At her age, she thought that nobody would want to marry her, for there were no prospects from that marriage to produce children, a primary function of marriage at that time. Orpah and Ruth were much younger, perhaps in their late 20s or early 30s. They could much more easily get married and have children that would help them in their later years. And so it was. When word got to Naomi, the Lord had visited her people by giving them bread. In other words, a judge had delivered Israel from their oppressors, and the famine ceased, that she decided to return home to Bethlehem, but advised her daughters-in-law to stay in Moab to find husbands there. Her reasoning was this. She was too old to get married, but even if she could find a husband, she was too old to have children. But even if she got married and had children, it would be years before those children would be old enough to marry these women and provide Ruth and Orpah heirs. Years which may cause these two women to be beyond childbearing years themselves. So the best thing for them was to stay in Moab and to find husbands there. Now Naomi's reasoning might sound strange to us, for we might ask, why would it matter if Naomi couldn't have children? Couldn't Orpah and Ruth simply find husbands in Israel? And while that was possible, the fact that these two women were Moabites might prove to be an obstacle. And were they really willing to take that risk? But more importantly, there was a practice common of the peoples of that time that is completely foreign to us, that of levirate marriage. Back in Deuteronomy 25, 5-10, we discussed how if a married man died having no children, then the man's brother would be expected to have sexual relations with the dead man's wife and raise up a son in his dead brother's name. That is what Naomi is describing for us here. Mahlon and Chilion were dead. However, if Naomi had more children, these children would be brothers to Mahlon and Chilion and would thus be expected to raise up heirs in their dead brother's name. With Naomi seeing this as an impossibility, this is why she is imploring Orpah and Ruth to remain in Moab to find husbands there. Both women wept, for it is evident that both of these women loved Naomi and loved the family that they married into. However, verse 14 says that Ruth clung to her mother-in-law while Orpah only kissed her, a sign of respect, but also a sign of farewell. What would happen next? Come back and find out, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Ruth chapter 1, verses 15 to 22, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.